Welcome to Sales Secrets from the Top 1%, where the world's best sales experts share their secrets to sales success. My name is Brandon Bornancin, a serial salesperson and entrepreneur, and I'm sitting down with the world's best sales experts to share their top secrets to sales success. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Sales Secrets from the Top 1%, where the world's best sales experts share their secrets to sales success. And I am thrilled, honored, grateful, and humbled to have with me today, Mr. Steve Hall. Steve is the co-founder at the Executive Sales Forum International in Sydney, Australia, where he is Australia's leading C-level sales authority and executive sales coach. If you sell high-ticket B2B sales, product solutions to anyone, Steve is the guy to go to. And as an executive sales coach, Steve molds CEOs, sales leaders, and sales teams into multi-million-dollar companies. And previously sold for companies like Unisys, TaylorMade Systems, IBS, Moss and Hopper, databases department, sales masterminds, and now leading the team over at Executive Sales Forum. Steve is a game changer in the sales industry, and we're happy to have him with us from Sydney, Australia. I know it's early for you, my man. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.
Very much my pleasure, Brendan. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, to kick things off, the audience, you are a multi-million-dollar sales maker, right? You help these companies and leaders generate millions in sales, and you've learned a lot, and I know the audience is dying to know really your top secret to sales success. And before we get there, I know the audience is also interested in hearing, who is Steve Hall? What's your background? Where'd you come from? What'd your parents do? How'd you get started in sales? Where have you worked? And what have been the sales successes, failures, and learning takeaways that you've had at each of these companies throughout your sales career? Because I'm sure they all helped you level up to the next thing that brought you to kind of your successful company now today. So to kick things off, why don't you give us a quick background on, who you are and how you got started in sales?
Okay, well, I was at university in the early 70s, and back in those days, going to university was pretty much a ticket to a job. It wasn't like now. We didn't have student loans. We in England, we being socialists, I got not only did I go to university for free, but the government paid me an allowance.
That's awesome.
So as a result, I had a great time, but I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about careers and things. But I did know three things. I knew I wanted to travel. I knew of all the places I wanted to go, I didn't particularly want to go to Australia. And I didn't know what career I wanted, but I knew I didn't want to be a salesman. So that's how it started.
Didn't want to be what was that last one?
I said that's how it started. And all the things I didn't want is what I ended up with.
That's funny.
So when I left university, I was having a great time. I spent my time at university smoking drugs, drinking beer, and chasing women. And unfortunately, I did it in that order, which didn't work out so well. And when I finished, all my friends were still there. So I hung around Bristol and had a great time. And then eventually the money ran out, and I thought I better get a job. And a friend of mine, I saw a job for a medical representative, and I didn't even know what a medical representative was, a pharmaceutical representative. And one of my mates was a doctor or a trainee doctor. And he said, no, it's a great job. You get a company car. And my job interview went pretty much, hi, have you got a degree? Yes. Okay, great. You start next week.
It's so my first question and boom, you're in.
Pretty much, yeah. So my first in inverted commas sales job was selling pharmaceuticals to doctors. And they put us through an intense 8-week training course. And what they trained us on were the different conditions that we sell drugs for, high blood pressure, arthritis, and things like that. So we could talk, not as an equal, obviously, but in an intelligent way to doctors about their patients and about the ways they could help their patients. And in a way, that was a good basis for me, because it taught me that the thing that people cared about wasn't the product so much; it was what it did for them and their customers in terms of doctors. And after 3.5 years doing that, I came to Australia on a year's holiday, and I've never gone back. That was 1979.
Nice.
And as a result of my supposed sales expertise, I got a job with Barrows Computers. Now, selling pharmaceuticals is not, there's no closing the deal. There's none of the things we talk about in sales techniques, you were basically doing what was called detailing. You talked about the pros and cons of the drugs you sold to the doctors in the context of a medical context. So it wasn't really your typical sale. And so when I joined Barrows selling computers, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. And they said, hey, here's some calculators, go out and sell them. And I walked the streets of Sydney and I made a grand total of 1 sale in 6 months.
Oh, wow. And by the way, how long were you doing the medical sales thing for?
3.5 years.
3.5 years. What, did you like it? Did you hate it? How was it?
Well, the great thing about that was when I was my own boss. I saw my boss once every 6 months. I got to stay in nice hotels and take doctors out to meals and talk intellectually about medical issues. So it was great because, I'd come out of university. I was used to talking what am I trying to say here? I was used to talking about things in an inquisitive way rather than trying to hard sell something. And that worked really well for making sales, because you never said to a doctor, okay, sign here, would you like it in blue or pink? You talk to them about the pros and cons and why they should consider it, and then they would at some stage prescribe it for their patients. It was an indirect type of sale. It was by no means a hard sale. Okay. And that was enjoyable. And because I enjoyed talking to people, I did reasonably well. But it was very different from going around and trying to sell, let's say, calculators and computers. And I was really helpless. And eventually my boss said, Steve, he said, you're a really bad salesman, but you're obviously fairly bright. How about you move into support? So I moved into customer service and customer support, and I got in charge of the help desk. I became a project manager. I became a professional services manager, and I spent quite a long time working my way through the support ranks.
Oh, wow.
And as a support manager, working with different people using computers in different industries, I got exposed to a lot of different industries. I talked to a lot of senior executives, not about selling them stuff, but about, in many ways, solving the problems that got by being sold stuff, if that makes any sense. Post-sales support.
Yep.
And at one stage, my role was to work with the salespeople to make sure they didn't overpromise, and to work after the salespeople had been there, making sure that we kept their promises. So again, that was a good grounding for me.
Yeah, like a good starting point.
Yeah, and then in about 91, I decided I was sick of clearing up other people's problems. I'd rather create my own problems. So I moved into marketing. And I spent a couple of years with Unisys, as it was then, doing in marketing 4GL systems and two various computer tools and middleware and things like that. And then Unisys very generously decided to give me a lot of money to go away, which was really nice. And then I discovered that at 42, there wasn't that many people looking for middle-aged...
Hold on. At Unisys, so you were doing sales, and then you were doing support sales, and then you went into marketing. What were some of the biggest sales learning experiences, failures, successes that you had? Because you were at Unisys for like 14 years.
Well, it was Barrows became Unisys. They merged with Sperry, yeah.
Yep. So you were there for a while through mergers, acquisitions, different markets, products probably. What were some of the biggest sales successes, takeaways that you had there?
Well, I learned to see things from the perspective of the salespeople, obviously, because I worked hand in hand with them. But I also learned to see things from the perspective of the customer, what they wanted out of the system, not just why they bought the system, what the results were, and how what they bought affected them. One of the things we sold was accounting software. And I remember at one stage, one of my customers, they had some problems with the software, and we spent 24 hours going through making changes to the data so they could get their annual report out. So I saw not just what they bought, but why they bought it and what they did with it. So that was a great learning. And one of the best training courses I ever did was called Sales for Support People. And that taught me about listening to customers, about giving them a chance to speak, about when they were frustrated and angry, letting them get things off their chest, and then working with them to solve problems.
Awesome. Yeah.
So that was, so I think and the other big thing I learned was how different people in different industries see things. So the biggest takeaway from that, and probably the biggest lesson I've got, is to be able to see things from the perspective of the potential customer.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that was the biggest takeaway at Unisys, was being able to see things from the perspective of the customer. Are you saying that's like your sales secret?
Say that again?
I was saying, you said the biggest takeaway from Unisys was being able to see things from the perspective of the customer, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. How how would you recommend a salesperson to try to develop that skill or that strategy to see things from the point of view of the customer?
I think you need a number of things. I think you need imagination and empathy. Einstein created his theories by imagining riding on a beam of light and how things would seem. I think if you can imagine that you're in the role of a CEO or a CSO or a head of marketing or a CFO, what would I care about if I was that CFO in that company? If I'm selling to a manufacturer, what issues do I think manufacturers might have? And what would I care about if I was that person? Now, you need to do research. You need to look at what the industry is, what the challenges are, what the local regulatory issues are. But the more thought you can put into things, okay, if I were them, what would I care about? What would I be worried about? What would be my top priorities? Then the better. And to a degree, it comes with experience and dealing with working with different industries. But a big part of it is just being able to just empathy, essentially.
Yeah, that's
not empathy. Not just empathy, caring about what people care about, but understanding what they care about. And you can do research, look at annual reports, look at what people say on LinkedIn, read industry magazines. There's a lot of research you can do.
Yeah, research. So you recommend like, hey, check out the 10K, check out the reports, connect on LinkedIn, follow them, figure out what they're talking about, their interests, their hobbies, their content.
And also, you can if you need to broaden your perspective. I mean, in sales in particular, we all focus on our own stuff. How to do prospecting, how to create a value proposition, how to close a deal, how to manage a sale. We're all thinking about our own techniques and ways of doing things and account-based marketing, and that's great. You need to know those things, but we need to also realize that our customers don't give a damn about any of those things. If you're the CEO of a bank, you care about regulation, you care about reputation, you care about risk, you care about the regulatory environment. There's a lot of things you care about. None of those have got anything to do with sales techniques.
Right. Yeah. That's funny. Awesome. So then you said, okay, I did the support, the sales, the marketing. I'm ready. Like you're just like, I'm ready to move to the next thing. And you said when you left Unisys, they paid you out. You made some cash. It was time to move on. You had a super successful 14-year career there. And then you said you ran into some trouble. Like, hey, it was hard to find a new thing, right?
Well, I sort of had a new thing because my wife, just as I left, my wife opened a catering company. So I spent 6 months helping it get that established. And we had a massive function for 440 people in a field, 4-day meals a day for a week that kept us quite busy for a while organizing that.
Wow.
And then once I started looking around for a job, I thought, I better get some money. But so I ended up with a small company that sold ERP systems. Now, nice. I knew computers, obviously, but I didn't know a lot about ERP systems. And the guy that hired me, who was 10 years younger than me, so he was actually quite brave to hire someone 10 years older than him as essentially a starting BDM. And funnily enough, he ended up being my customer, my client, I should say, for 8 or 9 years. So we still get on very well. And he said, "Okay, we've got this great software. We've got customers who are publishers and consumer electronics distributors, but I think it might work for other people. Here's a phone. Here's a phone book. Start calling people." And so, it wasn't quite that bad. I had a list of companies to call, so I started calling companies. And after 6 months of not much progress, I went back and said, "Look, I'm calling all these distributors, and when I speak to food distributors, they say, look, have you got use-by dates? Because they're critical for food, and we don't have use-by dates. And if I talk to motor dealers, they say, motor manufacturers, they say, can you handle dealers? And we say, no, we don't really do that." So I said, and we were competing with the biggest software developers in the world. Back then it was JD Edwards and BPix and people out of the States.
Yeah.
And we were a tiny Aussie company. I said, look, rather than trying to sell everything to everyone, why don't we focus on what we're really good at? We know we're good at publishing. We know we're good at consumer electronic distributors. Why don't we just focus on that? And so we did. And we changed the name of the product to focus on that. And we ended up being the leading supplier to those two niches in Australia and the leading supplier to book publishers in the world because we focused on a particular industry.
It's huge.
Yeah. And we ended up selling to publishers in, 26 countries. And the guy that hired me left and I took over and I ended up being in charge of sales and marketing for that company worldwide.
So the doubling down on like the pick a niche and get rich, that totally worked for you guys then.
Absolutely. Because we used to go up against in later years, we used to go up against Oracle and SAP and the really big companies that were literally
so hard to beat. Yeah.
Literally 10,000 times bigger than us, but we really knew our niche really well. They would go into someone and say, okay, how important is returns to you? And in publishing, returns is massive. And I could go in and I wouldn't ask how important returns is. I would say, okay, well, when you have returns, obviously this happens and this happens, you have that rule, and does this happen? And I could talk, at a really detailed level about something that was really important to them. And that's what won us the business, the fact that we knew their business as well as they did.
Wow. That's amazing. So you picked a niche to get rich, the consumer products, right?
Consumer electronics.
And then what was the other industry? You picked book publishing.
Yeah.
And then, and then you just saw the business skyrocket.
Yeah, well, as I said, the challenge we had, and it was a challenge. It was also a good thing in a way. There was only about 50 book publishers in Australia big enough to afford our software, and we already had 10 of them.
Wow.
So you don't make a snap decision to buy an ERP. It's not just a question of it's costing a lot of money, but it's a massive disruption. To install an ERP is a 12 to 24 month project, which totally disrupts your company. So, smart closing techniques like, would you want one or two don't really work that well. And it's difficult. You can't just go in and persuade someone they need to buy one now. You've got to wait until they're ready. So you learn a lot about building relationships, nurturing people for the long term so that when something happens there and they are ready to buy one, you're there and they understand you. And the best deal I ever got was for I don't know if you remember Pioneer that used to do high quality TVs and electronics.
Yeah.
I talked to them for 3 years.
I've got a DJ booth here where we DJ No Q5 and it's by Pioneer.
Yeah. Well, I talked to them for 3 years and went down and talked about all of their issues and gave me occasional demonstration, and they were never ready to buy. But when they were ready to buy, we had no competition. They just came to us and said, okay, we're ready. How much is it?
Wow. Yeah, because you already were like the number one player in the market.
Well, it wasn't so much that we were number one in the market because we'd had big competitors, but I'd been regularly talking to them. They knew we knew their stuff. They knew who our customers were. They knew we could do what they wanted. And when they needed to install a system quickly because there was some change in legislation in Australia, we brought in a value-added tax. They thought, okay, we know that these guys can do it. Let's just buy it.
Wow. That's awesome. And then did you have any like major like failure or what other learning takeaways did you have with TaylorMade before moving on to IBS?
Well, I had a big failure that turned into a success, and I had a big failure that turned into a big failure.
Okay. Yeah. Walk us through those. Okay.
One company, you remember the Y2K bug, of course.
Yeah. That was like the big thing.
Yeah, well, in early 98, a company, we talked to a company, Sanyo, and they had to get rid of their old system. It just wouldn't handle Y2K.
Wow.
So I talked to their CFO and I said, what's the most important thing to you? And he said, it's low risk, safety. We can't afford for this to go wrong. Great. So we showed them how we specialized in their industry. We had other people using the software. It didn't need any major changes. We could install it quickly. But the person making the decision was the IT manager, and the IT manager wanted something trendy on his resume. So he made the decision to go with SAP, which was a great product, but it wasn't really, it was very, very expensive, took an awful long time to install. And I said, look, there's no way that you're going to be able to go live in time using SAP. And the guy said, no, we've got this, we're definitely going to go with them. And I couldn't change his mind. And then 3 months later, they came back and said, look, SAP can't do it. So we went through the process again. And the IT manager said, "Oh no, we're going to go with this other product." And I said, "You do realize that other product doesn't actually work in anyone in Australia, and you'd be the first in Australia. It's a massive risk." And the CFO said, no, it's the IT manager's decision. If it doesn't work out, we'll sack him. And I thought, well, that's not terribly responsible. So I wrote a letter saying, "Dear CFO, we really wish you the best of luck. We think we think you've made a mistake. These are the reasons we think you made a mistake, but I hope we're wrong. But if we're not wrong, give us a call." And in early 1999, we got a call saying, "Help."
Really? I can't believe you wrote the CFO and said that. Like, what gave you the idea? You're just like, look, I got to let this CFO know he's making the wrong decision. Because I knew they were going to screw up.
I mean, it was obvious. It was never going to work. So I said, if you're in trouble, call us. And when they got in trouble, they called us, and we sold them the no discounts, full list price, and we had them live 3 months before they needed to be live.
Wow!
And it probably, apart from what they spent trying to make the wrong systems go live, we ended up charging them a premium price for the speed we did it at. So that was a failure that became a success. And then quite a while later, I was living in Paris. I moved to, when we got taken over by a Swedish company, we moved to Paris as a global account manager. I was looking after the 2 largest publishers in the world.
Okay.
And I ended up selling one of them a deal to buy our software in Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, Belgium, and a couple of other countries, Poland, and a couple of other countries. Great deal. It was, and it made me the top salesman in the company in that year. And it also put me on accelerators. And anything else I sold, I was going to make 10% commission. And I was working on another deal with the second largest publisher in the world for them to buy our software everywhere in the world apart from the USA. And 3 weeks before the end of the year, we had everything organized. We agreed the price, we'd agreed everything, and it was going to be about $4 million US. And with 3 weeks to go, that company lost $50 million in a totally unrelated area, and they cut all spending.
Wow. That's a lot of money.
Now, the mistake I'd made in the first deal, I talked to everyone. I was on a steering committee to install our software in Asia. I looked after their company in Australia and in South Africa. I'd been to Poland. I'd been to Spain. I'd been to Germany and France and the UK and the USA, talking to all of the different stakeholders, and I was all across them like a rash. I knew everyone. But in the other company, I'd worked entirely through the international CIO because they made it hard for me to get to the senior executives, and I'd never needed to before. He'd always bought things off me and it'd be no problem. So when all of a sudden the people at the very top said no more spending, I had nowhere to go. I couldn't get past the guy I'd been working with. He wasn't going to put his career on the line to help me. And that mistake cost me $300,000 in commission, which was a bit of a pain. Brendan, I've lost you.
Sorry, was on mute. I was just saying, what would you have done? I said, brutal. What would you have done differently to win that deal, do you think? Was there anything? I mean, that $50 million hit, you cannot control. Right? Like maybe
you can't, but what I would have done and would have made a difference, and what I should have done is I should have got other people from my company involved more at a higher level. So if I couldn't get past the CIO, I should have organized for the president of our company, for the president in the USA, which is where the head office was, to meet with the top people in that company. And rather than me do it myself through my contact, do it as what we would now call ABM,
like a group pursuit, account-based sales and marketing,
And that's what I'd done with the other company. It's just it'd been easy for me to do with this one guy. He'd always bought stuff off me, and I didn't bother to. I didn't bother to do it properly. It was really stupid.
Wow, and it unfortunately cost $300K. That's brutal. I mean, now I bet you'll never let one person just rely on one DM or one buyer, like work the whole account, huh?
You've got to, because stuff happens. I mean, he could have got hit by a bus. I mean, stuff did happen. And the thing was, there was there was so much we could have done in terms of deferring payment, there was heaps of stuff we could have done to get that deal, but we didn't have the opportunity because we weren't talking to the right people for that circumstance.
Yep. So then, you had a successful career, there. What, after TaylorMade, learning everything that you learned, why did you decide to go to IBS, and what is IBS? What was next from Taylor?
Well, IBS came to us. IBS bought TaylorMade Systems.
Got it. Okay.
And so when that scenario I just described was when I was working for IBS in Paris. When IBS took over, I ended up training their sales teams in the USA and other people to sell our software and working with them to help them sell software. And then I moved as a global account manager. And then once I'd made that big sale, I wanted to move back to Australia. And I wasn't 100% comfortable with the way that the product and the company were going, and with the way they were dealing with my customers, because I was very protective of my customers. So eventually I said goodbye and came back to Australia and started working for myself.
Got it. Awesome. And was that, I know you kind of did the executive coach and director at when did Moss and Hooper and then the database department and then your own company kind of come into play?
Well, after that, I was working for myself. The database department was a long-term client. In fact, it was the CEO was the guy that initially hired me for my first sales job, a guy called John Bedwani.
Got it.
And Moss and Hooper was a consultancy that I worked with, and we worked with various clients through Moss and Hooper. So when I was working for myself, it was through Moss and Hooper.
Oh, sweet!
And funnily enough, the managing partner of Moss and Hooper is now a client of mine at another company. He's CEO of a different company. So it's a lot of it too,
Yeah. Right. Okay. Cool. So then, ever since IBS AB. And the acquisition merger, have you been always just kind of doing your own entrepreneurial thing?
That's right. With different clients and with different partners. Yes.
That's awesome. Were you, I believe this was like the first time you were kind of going out on your own. Like, were you scared? Were you sick of corporate? Also, do you have it, was it hard to survive the different mergers and acquisitions as a salesperson? How was that?
Well, mergers and acquisitions are always a challenge. The first merger was when Barrows and Sperry got together to form Unisys. And at that stage, I was a professional services manager. Obviously, there's a lot of change when they merged. I moved into a different division as a project manager, and then I became a professional services manager in a different area in the finance area. And then I moved into marketing. So that wasn't, it was disruptive, but it wasn't too bad. When IBS took over TMS, there was a lot of interesting challenges.
Okay. Like what?
Well, they didn't, and we talked about niches and focusing on a particular thing. They were much more generic. So they kept thinking they could replace our software with their software. And every so often someone would come across and say, okay, we're going to take your software out of all your publishing customers and we're going to put our software in. And then I would take whoever came over from Sweden into a room and I would give them a 2-hour presentation on how publishing worked. And say, okay, if your publishers need subscriptions, they need new title releases, they need royalties, they need book production modules, they need this and this. How much of that can your software do? And they'd say, oh, well, none of it. And I'd say, okay, well, bugger off back to Sweden then and leave us alone. Maybe not in those words.
Right.
And so, it took there was a fair degree of infighting until we convinced them that there was no way that their software was ever going to be able to replace ours. And then they just decided to incorporate ours into what they did. But that was a more technical thing.
Yeah. The technical software merger.
Yeah.
Wow. And then, when you were thinking about what made you decide to start your own thing?
Well, I wanted to come back to Australia from Paris. I had creative differences, as they say in music, with the company. So I resigned. I was actually on contract at that stage. So I said I'd come back, see out my contract. And while I was doing that, I started thinking about what I was going to do next. And I thought, I was in my how old was I? I was pushing 60. So the chances of me getting a full-time job anywhere were fairly slim. So I thought I'll work for myself, and it's worked out quite well.
That's amazing. And then when launching your own company, working with all these different clients, you did a lot of different roles, from inside sales, outside sales, support, marketing. What were you thinking about, consulting or running? Like, tell us about the company that you started and the services that you offered at that time or now.
Well, when you leave a lot, I've been with essentially two companies for 26 years. So, it had been comparatively stable. So
congrats,
when you leave,
by the way, that's pretty awesome.
Sorry?
I said, congrats, by the way, that's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
I feel like you have to be tenacious and resilient, right? To be able to just go through all of that over that time period. Like a lot of me running my own company, we go through so much in a year, let alone a decade or 26 years, 23 years from your experience staying at two companies. So that's incredible.
Yeah, it was interesting at times, definitely.
What's your secret to being super successful at a company if you want to be there for the long term?
That's a good question. I haven't thought of that. I think you need to be resilient. I think you need to take the job seriously, but not too seriously. In other words, if you get caught up in the corporate politics, I've never been a schemer. I've always believed in just doing a good job, working, looking after my clients, trying to be conscientious. And I've just never played politics. I think if you start playing politics, it can backfire on you.
Me too. I just don't have patience for it. I don't have time or patience. I never got to people that were really good at politics, but that's awesome. So be resilient, care about the clients, care about the work, and just stay at it is what it sounds like. But you were saying, so you've been working at these two companies for over 2 decades. Now you're about to be off on your own. Walk us through that experience and, your mindset at that point. I'd probably be scared shitless.
Oh, I was, absolutely. Well, yeah, I was. I mean, we had a bit of a buffer from. I had about 9 months where I was seeing up my contract where I had time to start thinking of what to do.
Yep.
And I had a period. Interestingly, on LinkedIn, people talk about making money on LinkedIn. When I first got on it, I put a little note saying, "I'm coming back from Paris. I'm going to be at a loose end. If anyone knows of anything." And a guy I'd worked with years before said, "I need a project manager in Darwin." And I said, "Well, I don't want to work in Darwin, and I haven't been a project manager for 20 years, and I was a pretty bad project manager then." And he said, "No, you'll be fine." I said, "No, I'm sorry. No, I'm not interested." And he said, "Well, it's $1,800 a day plus expenses." And I said, "Oh, okay."
Yep.
So I ended up working as a project manager in a software project in Darwin for 6 months, and that sort of filled the coffers quite nicely for a while. And then I started doing
to go from sales to project management.
Well, I'd been a project manager, and it was, I was never particularly good at the technical aspects of project management. I was pretty good at the people side, and that got me through. So that went reasonably well, and I made a decent amount of money. I think I made $300,000 in 8 months.
Awesome,
and
that's a
and then I started just looking around for what to do, and I was doing various sales oriented things with different people. And then I joined Moss & Hooper. I teamed up with Moss & Hooper. And then over time, we found what we were doing. I came across a guy called Mike Scher. I don't know if you know Mike Scher. He's the CEO of Frontline Selling in Atlanta.
Yep, Frontline Selling, yeah.
And through people I'd known at IBS, I heard about Mike, and I gave him a call, and we got to know each other. And he focuses on helping people get meetings at executive level. And I've done a lot of work at that level just through my time with different companies as a support manager, as a professional services manager, and working in the computer industry. So I was quite comfortable at that level. And so I started using some of Mike's methodologies and adding in some of the things that I knew. And from then on, I decided that that would be what I'd specialize in, is working at executive level.
That's awesome. That's so like ironic. That's awesome. And then, so then what was, you took the one project and then you kind of started to move on. How was it like, building your book of business? Like what were some of the biggest sales successes or failures when you have been doing your own company, right?
Well, that was. I mean, we had a friend of the managing partner of Moss and Hooper was in a digital agency. They had actually a very successful digital agency, and he mentioned to my colleague. He said, "Look, I'm really good when I get in to see senior executives. I can talk the talk and I know everything about digital marketing and we've had a lot of success, but we're not very good at actually getting in to see them. Can you help us?" And because I'd been talking to Mike and focusing on that, we said, "Yeah, of course we can." So I went to see him and I said, "Okay, who do you work with?" And he said, "Oh, well, we can work with anyone." I said, "Okay, that's helpful. Okay. Let's pick someone now. Who is there a particular industry that you've got some credibility with, that you've experience with?" And he said, "Yeah, actually, we've done a lot of work with retailers." I said, "Great, okay, let's look at retailers. What do you do for them?" He said, "Oh, we can do anything." I said, "Okay, that's a bit broad." So I thought, okay, let's think. What's the biggest problem that retailers have that you can help them with? Now, this was 7-8 years ago, and back then in Australia, it was a big issue about competing with Amazon and eBay and people like that because they don't pay GST, which is our form of value-added tax. And there's a big fuss in the papers about how we charge via GST on imported items, and how can people compete with how can the retailers compete with all this online retailing? So we did a bit of research, and we thought, okay, the biggest issue that retailers have got is online competition. So we put together a little campaign using these techniques, and we basically called up CEOs of the major retailers and said, "We want to talk to you about helping you compete with online retailers." And it went gangbusters. I think we got them 35 meetings out of 100 retailers with, by the CEOs, CMOs, or heads of digital. Damn. So it went really, that was a big success.
Yeah, it's huge. And that's all just like, again, like picking a niche, going hyper personalized with the account-based sales and marketing.
Yeah, it was picking a niche. It was focusing on the biggest thing. The question was, what's the most important thing to them? Can we help them with it? Okay, let's talk to them about that. And the message was very simple. Our objective, you need to know your objective. Our objective was get a meeting with the right person. The way we did that was to contact them in various ways and say, we want to talk to you. What about helping you compete with online retailers? As simple as that.
Wow. Yeah, that makes total sense. And then,
but the interesting thing was that they resold hardware and tools from, I won't name the company, but one of the 2 or 3 largest software companies in the world. And this company said to them, "How come you're getting all these meetings with these great people?"
Yeah.
And they said, "Oh, we're working with Moss and Hooper." So this company came to us and said, "Can you work with us?" And we said, "Sure."
Wow.
So we said the same thing. Okay, now, who do you want to? I said, "Look, the best thing to do is to focus on a particular industry. I know you can do anything for anyone, but let's focus on who do you want to get into." And they said, "Okay, let's focus on travel and entertainment." I said, "Okay, great. What do you mean by travel and entertainment?" And they said, "Well, airlines and hotels and theme parks and travel agents." I said, "Okay, you do know that from the perspective of an airline, they don't think they're a theme park. And the CEO of a hotel chain doesn't think that they're a travel agent."
Yeah, that's funny.
I said, "They're not really the same industry. You might think they're the same industry, but they don't think they're the same industry." So anyway, eventually we decided we're going to focus on finance and insurance.
Totally not anything to do with travel or entertainment.
Well, there's only 3 airlines in Australia, and 2 of them were named accounts anyway that we weren't going for. So so we decided to focus on finance and insurance, and even that's not really an industry; it's a collection of industries. There's health funds, there's superannuation, there's insurance, there's major banks, there's credit unions, there's regional banks. So there are collections,
like sub niches,
Exactly. But we said, okay, let's look at them. And we split them into 3 groups, small regional banks, insurance companies, and superannuation, because they all needed different value propositions. And we came up with value propositions, and we got them meetings with quite a lot of senior executives in those people.
That's awesome.
That part of it was successful, but from their perspective, it wasn't successful for 2 reasons. What we were getting were meetings with senior executives where they can build relationships, where they can understand what people care about strategically, and where they can position themselves in different areas. What they were looking for were hot leads this month.
Yeah, like instant gratification in sales.
That's right. And so their sales guy would get on the we do these meetings on the phone. We say, "Oh, look, hello, Mr. CEO of the regional bank. Thanks a lot for agreeing to talk to us about how we can help you to sign new home loan customers and improve your expense income ratios," which is one of the value propositions, And this guy would get on the phone and say, "Okay, well, first of all, let me tell you all about us. We're a really big, important company, and we sell to all sorts of industries that aren't anything to do with you. And we have lots of customers in countries that aren't Australia. And we sell all these things that you don't really care about. And we're really big and important, and they just wouldn't stick to the point. And then some of these CEOs would say, "Well, actually, we're looking for a new banking system." And they say, "Oh, no, we don't sell. I mean, our company sells that, but I sell customer engagement software." So it was just a total mismatch between what the people at the other end expected and wanted, and what the sales guy was trying to sell. So that was successful from a perspective of getting them in front of the right people, but it was significantly less than successful in them doing anything with it. And we talked to them and we counseled them, but the way that particular company is set up is very structured along product lines, along getting leads in the short term, and along that kind of sales.
Yeah, and when it comes to the messaging, because you've been so great at getting these C-suite opportunities and meetings, like, what do you think are the key pillars to making that happen? Like, obviously you talk a lot about, you got to pick an industry. What else, is critical to nailing down these CEO, CMO, CFO, CIO meetings?
Well, I mean, I read an article a while back called "The Terrible Truth About Your Prospects," or "The Terrifying Truth About Your Prospects." And I say to people, look, when you have a sales meeting, what do you talk about? You talk about your customers, you talk about your pipeline, you talk about your prospects, you talk about your products, you talk about your competitors, you talk about your targets, you talk about your stuff. And when you have an executive meeting, what do executives talk about? They talk about their customers, they talk about their regulations, their industry, they talk about their stuff. So the terrifying truth about your customers is that they're just like you. They care about themselves. They don't give a damn about you.
Yep.
The question is, what do they care about? And the other thing to think about is, who's your competition? And when you're trying to get a meeting with, let's say, a CEO, a CIO, a CFO, your competition is anybody that wants a slice of their time. It's their board, it's their direct boss, it's their direct reports, it's their peers, it's their employees, it's their customers, it's their production team, and it's also anyone that's trying to sell them anything. And you're competing with all of them for a slice of their time.
Yep.
So the question you've got to ask is, why should they spend half an hour of their valuable time talking to you when they've got a whole heap of other people they could be talking to?
Yeah.
And that's what you've got to find.
And I guess, how do you find that out?
Well, you've got to do your research. I mean, what do they care? What do people, let's assume you don't have to necessarily pick a niche. It helps, but you don't have to. But the question is, if you're trying to get to a particular person in a particular position, what do people in their industry care about? What do people in their position care about? What do people in their company care about? And what do they themselves specifically care about? So if you're the CEO of a particular company, what do CEOs generally care about? Just generically, what do they care about? Well, they care about risk, they care about profit, they care about customer engagement. There's quite a few things they care about.
Yep.
Then what particular challenges does this industry have at this time? So for instance, here in Australia, We're having a royal commission into banks, which is showing up all sorts of interesting behavior. And if you're talking to people in banks, one of the things that's obsessing them right now is all of the things coming out of the royal commission. So it's that's their obsession. And if you try and talk to them about anything else, you haven't got much chance of getting through to them. Wow. But if you can talk to them and say, "Hey, I can make this go away, or I can help you restore your battered reputation," then you've got a much better chance of getting through to them.
Wow.
So what's the big thing in the industry, and what's the big thing in their company from their perspective? Because even if a company's top priority is customer relationships, for instance, the CEO is going to see that from a different perspective to the head of customer service, to the head of sales, to the head of marketing. So what's the perspective for that person in that company, in that role about that issue? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. And I mean, you just go down those bullet points and then boom, you've got everything you need to kind of craft your messaging to connect and book that appointment.
That's right. And I'm looking at, I mean, it's not the beautiful thing about the internet these days is it's not that hard to do that research. Consultants.
You can do it quick. I mean, so quick. It's so much data is out there publicly available. You can knock it out.
That's right. You've got what we call annual reports. What do you call them? 301ks or something? I don't know. What's your
10Ks.
10Ks. Okay. So you've got your annual reports that talk about the company's strategy. You've got people put on LinkedIn what their focus is. You've got people, certainly the higher you go, the easier it is. Because the higher you go, the more likely those people are to talk to the press, to talk to their investors, to write letters in the annual report, to be interviewed, talking about what their priorities are.
Yeah. Makes sense.
And then the question is, okay, how can you help them get what they want and get what their most important priority is?
Yeah, I love that. No, that's amazing, Steve. This is great, and this moves me into my next question, which is the premise of the book, Sales Secrets from the Top 1%, where the world's best sales experts share their secrets to sales success. If there was one thing that you had to tell yourself when you first got started in sales, if there was one thing that you could tell someone, a top secret, top sales strategy, top sales tip, best practice, playbook, you name it, for someone that you're about to hire, if someone you're about to bring on, or if you had to go back in time to just get started, out of everything that you learned at Unisys, at Taylor, at all of these places, right? Launching your own company, what would be, that one top sales secret that you would recommend to the audience?
It's quite interesting because there's a lot of new stuff. There's artificial intelligence and there's digital and social selling, and there's I was going to say account-based marketing. That's not new. That's ancient. But there's new tools to help you with that.
Yep. And a new title like account-based marketing and sales.
That's right.
Like enterprise sales and marketing back in the day, right?
Yeah, that's right. And yet people don't change. I mean, human nature doesn't change. It might evolve a little bit, but it doesn't really change that much. And my big secret is something I read 35 years ago when I was reading lots of sales books from people like Zig Ziglar. And back then I didn't really understand it. And it was very simple. Understand what your customer really wants and work out how to help them get it.
Understand what the customer really wants and work really hard to help them get it. It's a great secret.
But back then I didn't understand it because I used to think, well, yeah, but what if you don't sell what they want? But what I didn't understand is it's not what we want, as in we want a new CRM or we want an artificial intelligence system. It's the reasons they want it. What's the core reason? No one buys a CRM because they want to buy a CRM. They buy a CRM because they want to increase sales, become more efficient, etc. So look for the core reasons of what people really want, and then look at how you can help them get that. If you think about you've got a problem. You have a company, you've got a problem. What type of problems do senior executives talk about? Well, our reputation's gone down the toilet, or we're not making enough sales, or we're not making enough profit, or we've got a problem with production. They're the types of problems that customers have. And there are many different ways to solve those problems. If your problem is we're not selling enough, there are more than a dozen, there's dozens of ways of selling that. buy CRM, buy artificial intelligence, do sales training, sack salespeople, hire salespeople, reduce the price, change the product mix, do a campaign. I mean, there's a million different ways to solve that problem.
Yep.
If you're talking to people about the core problem, you can show them how your particular way of solving that problem will help them solve it, and they are more likely to go down that pathway. Whereas if you wait until they make a decision that the way to solve that problem is to do X, and you sell Y, they're never even going to come near you because they decided to go down a different route.
Yeah,
and that's why it's good to talk early on before. I mean, you know, budget, budget, authority, need, and time frame.
Yep.
If they've got to the stage of having all of those things, they've made a decision as to which pathway they're going to go down to, and they probably have got a pretty good idea of who they're going to buy, because they needed to do the research into who they were going to buy to know how to set the budget.
Right.
So if you're talking to them when they're bank qualified, 9 times out of 10 they've made an emotional decision anyway.
You're too late. You're coming to the party too late.
That's right. And that's why that company I mentioned earlier that was looking for qualified prospects, I think was not necessarily the right way to go. I think you want business conversations with the right people, and then you need to nurture them so that when the guy that hired me, my first sales job, John Bedwani, used to say, when a company in my market when a company in my area is ready to go to market, they will know me and I will know them. And I always thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, like building that relationship, and then when they have that need and they're ready for it, he's going to be in their funnel, top of mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that secret from back then, the Zig Ziglar secret was know what your customer wants, but know what they want, as in, to quote Simon Sinek, why? Why do they want what they want? What's the core objectives that they're trying to achieve? And then how can you help them achieve that core objective? And why is your way of doing it the simplest, easiest, least risk, fastest way of helping them get there?
Boom. There's the secret. There's the sales secrets, that's incredible, man. That's exactly, I think you sum that up perfectly. Find out what does your customer want? Why do they want it? Show them how you can help them get what they want, and then share how you helping them get what they want is the simplest, fastest, most cost-effective, highest return solution out on the market.
And least risk too, because risk's a big issue.
And least risk. Got it. That's awesome. Yeah.
I was going to say, risk cuts both ways. There's a risk of doing something. There's also the risk of not doing something.
Yep.
And that's what a lot of people forget. That once you've got in order to get the meeting, your biggest competition is anyone else after someone's time, as I've already said. But once you've engaged with someone, your biggest competitor by far is, this, of course.
Like,
it's do nothing.
Do nothing. Yeah. Not do anything at all.
That's the biggest competition.
That's the easiest thing to do. Nothing.
And the leverage against that is to make sure people understand the consequences of doing nothing.
Mm. And how would you do that? Like, how do you show them? How do you share with them the consequences of just doing nothing?
Well, you use what's called an NLP future pacing. You take to them a future net. If the current situation continues and you haven't done anything for 12 months, where are you going to be? What's the consequences going to be? If you don't do anything for 24 months and it takes you another 12 months to make a decision and another 12 months to implement that decision, if the status quo continues for 4 years, where are you going to be? You're in pain because you're not selling enough. You've got bad customer satisfaction. If this trend continues for a period of time, what's the consequences? You've got to get them to associate with the pain of not doing anything, of not making a change, and show how it gradually builds up until it becomes unbearable to not do anything. And why put off that toothache when you can have the tooth extracted tomorrow?
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. Steve, I love your sales secret. Find out what the customer wants, why they want it, show them how you're going to help them get it, and show them, why you're the best solution to help them get it. The least risk averse, the highest ROI, highest value, what else? Most cost effective, best, reliable, integrity, all of this jazz.
And ideally the simplest too.
The simplest. Yeah. Simplicity is critical.
It depends what you're selling, but we all tend to overcomplicate things. And also, it's a natural phenomenon to think that other people understand what we understand. So we often tend to talk about, especially in complex products, we tend to talk to people as if they understand the things that we understand. And they don't. We spend all of our time really focusing on our area, our products, our customers, and we know it inside out. And we can't understand how someone else can be so stupid as to not see how great it would be for them. But they're busy thinking about their stuff. We're going to get it across in as simple a way as possible. It's easy to use our own terminology, our own jargon, and other people don't use our jargon. You should avoid jargon at all costs unless it's the customer's jargon.
Yeah.
When I was selling ERP to publishers, I could talk publishing. I could talk about ISBNs and first print runs and new title releases and book production and pub dates and things, because that was their language. But if I talked computer language, I'd have lost them. Not to the computer people, but to the business people, I'd have lost them.
Wow. Yep, I completely agree. Well, this has been an incredible episode. Steve Hall, co-founder at Executive Sales Forum. Steve, where can people find, connect, subscribe to learn more from you?
Okay, well, obviously, pretty much everything's on my LinkedIn profile, which and I'm Steve Hall Sydney, easy to find.
Yep.
The website is execsalesforuminternational.com. And that talks about International Peer Advisory Forum, which is for senior sales leaders to cooperate across the Pacific with Australia, New Zealand, USA, and Canada, and help each other internationally. And they're the two key places.
That's awesome. LinkedIn, Steve Hall Sydney, and then execsalesforuminternational.com, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Steve Hall, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Sales Secrets from the Top 1%, where the world's best sales experts share their secrets to sales success. Order your copy at secretsalesbook.com. That's secretsalesbook.com. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Sales Secrets from the Top 1%. We release new episodes every Monday and Thursday, so make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube to never miss an episode.